Wasabi guys, welcome back to another how to build around this commander video. As a reminder, these are not deck techs. I just like going through the process of selecting a group of cards that I think would be interesting to build around a certain commander with. There's a time where I used to aggressively make deck tech videos, and I found it was just people looking to copy and paste a list rather than actually thinking about what they're doing. I mean, to each their own. If that's you, fine, but I'm way more interested in exploring the different ways you could potentially build around it. It doesn't mean you're going to have radically different strategies. With Urza Chief Artificer here, it's going to be very straightforward. It's going to be more linear than, say, some of the other commander options from the Brothers' War, because it is primarily focusing on artifact creatures. With that out of the way, if you have not already, please do subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. 45,000 of you. That is insane. Just a year and a half ago, I think I had maybe 20,000, so that's tremendous growth. Thank you so much. Urza Chief Artificer is a 6-mana esper-colored human artificer, a 4/5, with affinity for artifact creatures, so it's basically just affinity, but instead of any artifact, it has to be an artifact creature. Costs 1 less to cast for each of them you control, which if it didn't have that, Urza here would be a significantly worse commander option. 6 mana has become less and less desirable in 2022 compared to 10 years ago, when a lot of commanders were around that 5 to 7 mana range. Now it seems like if your commander is more than 4 mana, it needs to have some way to make itself cheaper, or it needs to be incredibly overpowered. Urza here does make himself cheaper with that affinity for artifact creatures. Artifact creatures you control have menace as well, which is a very good keyword. It means that if you have a combat-focused strategy, you don't have to worry as much about blockers. You can connect and deal more combat damage to your opponents. So we're going to be sure to want to explore as many options for artifact creature support, especially artifact creature support that offers them other keywords like flying, first strike, maybe additional power and toughness. The last trigger, though, is probably the biggest reason why I wanted to build around Urza here. At the beginning of your end step, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So this is becoming an Urza staple now. We saw it with the Urza Lord High Artificer card. We saw it with the Urza Saga land, and they're going to be perfect to build around because if you make these really big, they're going to get menace off of Urza himself, and you can give them other keywords, make it easier for them to deal combat damage. So this is exactly what you want. You want a commander that will help to enable itself. You don't really need that much more to work with because even if your board is empty, you're still going to get a 1/1 construct artifact creature token. Wait another turn, you're going to get another one. You're going to have a board presence at the very least of a couple creatures. It's linear, yes, but we're also going to be fooling around with artifact creatures in a way that I don't think we've really done before in Commander. Artifacts didn't really need that much more support, but within the past couple years, they received a ton of it. If we're just caring about artifact creatures, Modern Horizons 2 gave us some pretty solid ones like Esper Sentinel. Ornithopter of Paradise is going to be great in a 3-color deck. Thought Monitor is basically an artifact Muldrifter without the downside of having to pay its full mana cost to keep it out there. And Aethersworn Sphinx is another affinity for artifacts creature, this time with a Cascade trigger so you could potentially score something just below 9 mana. Commander 2021 also gave us some pretty solid artifact creature support. Digsight Engineer, whenever we cast an artifact spell we can pay 2 mana. If we do, we get another one of those construct creatures that get bigger. Low Shield will prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures we control, so even with the menace, if they are able to block them, it's not going to do much of anything. Bronze Guardian is kind of like another construct creature where it can become massive equal to the number of artifacts we control. Also has Double Strike itself, which is one of the best keywords ever made. Gives your other artifacts Ward 2, has Ward 2 itself. I mean, this card is so underrated. And then Angel of the Ruins, another underrated card from this commander product. When it enters, you exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. It's a 5/7 flyer, solid creature all around. And in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we got some more artifact creature support. Research Thief gives us card draw whenever one deals combat damage to a player. Cyberdrive Awakener gives our other artifact creatures flying. Can also make our non-creature artifacts 4/4s until the end of turn, which is pretty cool. And that's just some of what we got in the past couple years. Artifact support is not hard to find, folks. And the reason why it's so powerful is because it does a little bit of everything. You get great setup, Ethereum Sculptor, Foundry Inspector, Joyrus Familiar, making your artifact spells cheaper. Joyrus Familiar going a step further, it can also make our Commander one cheaper. Solemn Simulacrum's always been a staple in Commander, and while it's kind of been losing some luster over recent years because it is a 4-mana setup card, in this deck I think it does work. You can copy it, you can abuse it in more ways than the average deck. I think it's definitely worth playing here. And just because it is focusing on artifact creatures doesn't mean that with this new Urza, you shouldn't also explore non-artifact creature ways of setting up your board, or just setting up plays in general. Chief Engineer gives your artifact spells Convoke. Emery Lurker of the Lock is great if you just need to get something back from your graveyard. Maybe you intentionally discard it, or if you want to get it off the mill trigger, you'll then be able to cast it later on. Padim Console of Innovation, since this is more of a combat-focused deck, giving our artifact creatures hexproof is amazing. But both it and Vidalcan Archmage give us more card draw. And also, I mean, this goes without saying, if there are any non-artifact creatures that you were going to play in this deck, would probably be the other Urzas, like Urza Lord High Artificer and Urza Prince of Krug, both of which synergize perfectly with the strategy. You get another construct off of the Lord High Artificer trigger entering the battlefield, and you can tap any of your untapped artifacts for blue mana, and Prince of Krug makes your artifact creatures +2/+2 stronger, while also being able to create token copies of artifacts, making them 1/1 soldiers in addition to their other types. Another way that we're obviously going to abuse this commander is going to be with tokens. Now, just simply going wide for the purpose of making those constructs bigger, I don't think is bad at all, but you have some very simple ways of getting more artifacts out there. Psymaster Thopterist and Efficient Construction, they trigger whenever we cast artifact spells. They give us 1/1 Thopters. Anointed Procession is just going to double the token count anyway. Don't see this being bad at all. If you were going to play any non-artifact, this is probably high up on the recommendations, seeing as it will also give us more constructs. More constructs equals more power and toughness. More power and toughness means we can overwhelm our opponent's boards easily. Sharding Sphinx is probably going to be an all-star in this strategy, seeing as it's directly focusing on dealing combat damage to our opponents with artifact creatures, and it rewards us by getting a 1/1 Thopter for each time that occurs. But if all you care about is just getting a total number of artifacts out there for the constructs, Treasure Vault is a very good land. It starts out as an artifact land, which is pretty good because it does count towards the construct tokens. You can sack it later on and get a ton of treasure tokens, which will just make your constructs even larger. Mirrodin Besieged, again, you do have more options with this card, but it is more like Psymaster Thopterist, where that first mode is what you want if you need to make your constructs bigger. Biotransference is another newer card. This is from the Warhammer 40k crossover. Creatures you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So if you cast your commander, which isn't an artifact, you're still going to be able to trigger things like Mirrodin Besieged, which is really cool. It's another one of those rare enchantments that you're going to want to throw into a mostly artifact deck. You also get the upside of whenever you cast an artifact spell, you lose a life, but you get a 2/2 Black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. Emir Battlesphere is the best of both worlds if you care about going wide and you care about combat quality. You're going to get 4 tokens on its ETB, and if you attack with it, you can tap those Mir, give it that much more power to deal damage with. You want to go wide, you want to give your creatures some more power and toughness, you want to give them better keywords. So Steel Overseer and Tempered Steel are no-brainers here. The more of these you have out there, the better off you're going to be in combat, but if you really want to go off, Chroma's Memorial is a killer artifact. In addition to the menace you're giving them off of Urza, your other creatures are going to get Flying, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, Protection from Black, and Protection from Red. So those constructs that are just going to keep getting bigger for all of your artifacts, they're going to get a ton of amazing keywords. It's going to make it even harder to deal with them. Darksteel Forge makes all of our artifacts indestructible, which while it's not as flashy as giving them all of those amazing keywords from Chroma's Memorial, having large construct creature tokens that you keep getting at the beginning of your end step, it's going to be a force to be reckoned with. Another new card from the Warhammer 40k crossover that fits in perfectly with this strategy is Crypto Thrall. Kinda sounds like a name you would give to someone who sacrificed themselves, investing everything into cryptocurrency, but Crypto Thrall here for Magic the Gathering is a really solid card. It gives your other artifact creatures you control hexproof. So if one massive construct is enough to end an opponent, they're going to have to deal with Crypto Thrall first. Anytime you can delay the removal of another really good artifact creature in this deck, you're going to be better off in combat. Now, of course, we don't want to lean entirely on Urza and getting those large construct creatures, because we have plenty of other artifact creatures that are going to be effective if they connect with our opponents. Silas Wren is a good example of this. The Death Touch was already enough of a deterrence to keep opponents from blocking him, but it still didn't stop them from throwing out a random 1/1 if all they cared about was preventing the combat damage trigger. Giving him Menace was perfect because you can split the power, deal 1 to one creature, deal 1 to the other, so even if you can't deal combat damage to that player, you're knocking out 2 creatures instead of just 1. Steel Hellkite already had flying, but giving it menace also means that it's more likely to deal that combat damage, which means you're going to be able to activate its second ability, effectively wiping several permanents from an opponent's board. Wormcoil Engine is just a great combat creature in general. The fact that it's an artifact creature means it synergizes with our strategy, so Death Touch, Lifelink, and Menace is going to be an even greater force to be reckoned with. Same thing applies with Blightsteel Colossus. It was already going to be a challenge for your opponents to block and deal with. That being said, all they had to do was block with enough toughness, and it was maybe the slowest clock ever. Giving it menace means that the trample isn't going to be the only thing you rely on in order to deal infect, so you're more likely to knock out players. Another reason why artifact strategies are so powerful is because they have some of the best recovery out of any strategy. Dance of the Manse and similar sorceries can bring back several artifacts from our graveyard to the battlefield. Scrap Trawler and similar abilities off of things like Mirror Retriever have always made it easier to play artifact decks. We're constantly going to be getting artifact creatures and other artifacts from our graveyard back to our hand. Iron Soul Enforcer is a newer one from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Whenever it or our commander attacks alone, we return an artifact card from our graveyard to the battlefield. And one of the better creatures you can play in this deck, even if you're not focusing entirely on combos, is Sharuum the Hegemon. It comes into play, you get to return a target artifact card from your graveyard to play. That's just a simple ETB, but it's so powerful. Because, of course, if you do care about combos, you have plenty of options here. You could use Disciple of the Vault, Phyrexian Metamorph, or really taking advantage of the fact that Sharuum the Hegemon is a legendary creature, so that the Phyrexian Metamorph will come into play. The legendary rule will apply. You'll choose the original Sharuum, of course. You'll get the ETB of the new Sharuum, and then they'll just do this constant dance of back and forth. You'll get an infinite number of Disciple of the Vault triggers, select a different artifact in your graveyard to stop, and there are different variations of this combo, different combo pieces, but I just like the fact that in an otherwise linear strategy, you still have access to a lot of artifact combo pieces. You also have Sword of the Meek, which on its own isn't amazing. You know, you're just going to give a random creature +1 power, +2 toughness, but it along with Thopter Foundry is a combo. You could just pay a mana, sacrifice the Sword of the Meek, get yourself a Thopter. It triggers Sword of the Meek because it's a 1/1 Thopter. Sword of the Meek returns, you sacrifice it again for another mana. So you're basically just, with this combo alone, paying 1 mana to get a new Thopter. And if you have 5 mana available to do that, you can then sacrifice 5 artifacts for Time Sieve and then take an additional turn. You can just keep doing that until you get more resources, you build up your board, and then you win. Again, with these 2 cards, you can interact and abuse other cards. It doesn't have to be Time Sieve, but this is probably the most effective way of winning with that combo. Time Sieve itself could also be abused with pretty much anything that can make several tokens, like Sharding Sphinx, and you can consistently do this each turn. Deal combat damage to a player, get at least 5 of those Thopters, and then you're off to a good start. And as far as like the card I would probably recommend the most, it comes with the deck. So it's not like you have to really search hard for this card, but March of Progress is ridiculous. The return of Overload, and this time you get it on something that's going to make artifact creature decks even stronger. Choose target artifact creature you control. For each creature chosen this way, create a token that's a copy of it. And you can overload for 7 mana, so it's kind of like a Cyclonic Rift, where the overload is pretty much the only way you want to play it. And it doesn't even specify like non-token artifact creature, it's any kind of artifact creature. So your construct tokens are going to get massive. You're going to create a token that's a copy of them. Those tokens are going to be equally massive. There's a lot to like about the cards they included in this deck. So again, while it's going to be rather linear, maybe boring to some, to me, I just like the simplicity of this artifact strategy. You don't have to overwhelm your opponents with combos. You could just make it as simple as a combat-focused artifact creature strategy. And with this Urza, it works. You get quality keywords. You get a way of recasting him to where it's not going to cost you a ton of mana each time you have to do that. And he provides you with the creatures that he's going to give menace. So I'm a big fan of this commander option. I think it's going to be a ton of fun to build around. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Again, thanks so much for 45,000 subscribers. Subscribe if you have not. I really do appreciate it. Commander Void here signing off. I will see you all next time.